What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
Why do Catholics worship Mary? Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
Where is purgatory in the Bible?
I think the Pope has too much authority.
What's stopping you? You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hey everybody, welcome again to Call to Communion. This is the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters, those of you who have questions about the Catholic faith, and you're kind of looking around, you're talking to this friend or this person that you met at the store about the Catholic faith. Well, there is a better source. How about us? The Catholic faith is always represented as clearly as possibly right here on EWTN, and this program is specifically made for everybody who is a non-Catholic, perhaps a fallen away Catholic, never been a Catholic, but you've got questions about the faith. Here's our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. You can also text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for our response and then text us your first name and your brief question. Message and data rates may apply. Again, that phone number, 833-288-EWTN. We are waiting to hear from you right now. Michael Birchfield is our producer. Matt Kabinski is our phone screener. He'll be the first person you speak with. Jeff Burson is handling social media. So if you want to pose your question via Facebook or YouTube, you can certainly do that as well. I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how are you today?
Couldn't be better. How about you, my friend?
I'm doing all right, thank you.
Got a very interesting question here. This came in email, and they have requested anonymity. So, Anonymous says, science proves that the core of the earth is absolute fire. Could that be hell? Won't the earth swallow up the people that will go to hell? What are your thoughts?
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the question. So, here's what we know about hell and the afterlife. So we know that in the present moment, the souls that have died, soul separation from the body, that's the definition of death, can either experience a beatific vision directly, immediately upon death, even without the benefit of a physical body, the pains of purgatory or the pains of hell, immediately upon death. All right. Now, our state between now and the second coming of Christ is a disembodied state. At the end of time, it'll be an embodied state. We're going to have the resurrection of the dead. We get our bodies back. Okay. So what is it that a soul in hell would experience right now? Okay. Well, first of all, I think it's very difficult to think about hell being spatially located when you don't have a body. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's one of those mysteries we're going to have to sort of chalk off to divine providence. But the pain of hell, the principal pain of hell that the souls of the lost experience in the present moment is the pain of loss. All right. It is the pain of despair and the complete hopeless realization that one has lost one's greatest good and source of all happiness. All right. We all aim for happiness. This is one of the facts about human nature that's almost impossible to dispute. Everyone wants to be happy. All right. Now, we have different notions about what happiness consists in, and one of the gifts of the Catholic Church is to tell us, right, it's the vision of God, all right, the fulfillment of all desire. And to have your eyes kind of wide open to that and then realize that you've been deprived of that forever. That's the principal pain of hell, the pain of loss. All right. And with that comes despair and hatred of God. And all of those are spiritual, we'll say, or psychological pains. All right. Now, when you get the resurrected body, Holy Scripture and tradition would seem to indicate that there's also going to be pain of sense attached to it. Now, Scripture speaks about the fires of hell. It's an open question how literally we should take those passages and how metaphorically, and I'm not competent to make that judgment right now. But based on what we know about the experience of hell, I don't think there's any particular reason to postulate that the hell of the damned after the resurrection will necessarily be located at the physical center of the present planet on which we live, given that the earth itself is going to participate in the renewal that we all experience in Christ at the second coming.
Ah, very good. Hope that's helpful for you. We have one more here before we go to break. This is from Randy in St. Louis, listening to us on Covenant Radio. Randy says, hello, Tom and Dr. Anders. I have a question about 1 Corinthians 4, verse 4. when Paul refuses to pass judgment on himself. Is this acceptable in responding to questions on assurance of salvation? Thanks, Randy.
Oh, so in other words, would it be, when asked about questions of assurance, do you, for instance, have assurance of your salvation? Should I reference 1 Corinthians 4, verse 4
Right.
in reference to that? Yeah, I think that's an absolutely appropriate thing to do. And there's a lot more we can say about the question of assurance, but this does mark one of the key differences between the way a Catholic would think about assurance of salvation and the way, say, an evangelical Protestant would think about it. Within the Calvinist tradition, which broadly informs evangelical Protestantism, one concludes that one is saved in virtue of certain interior experiences. Right now, and those are differently conceived of depending on which stream of the tradition you're in. But basically, once you come around to the conviction that you've got real faith, then you reason like this: well, salvation comes through faith alone. I now assess that I have real faith, therefore I'm saved. Okay. Now, there's a lot of debate over the last 500 years within Protestantism about how you assess whether or not you have real faith or spurious faith. And because of that, there's a lot of introspection. All right, I'm going to turn inward, look within my own interior life to see if I discern within myself the marks of election or the marks of regeneration, the marks of true faith, or however you do it. Okay, the Catholic Church says that whole thing is misguided. All right, we don't gain assurance of our salvation by looking inward. We gain assurance of our salvation by looking outward at the source of our salvation, who is Jesus, and the objective ground and promise of our salvation, which is the universal salvific will of God, made manifest to us in the sacraments. Christ said, if you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have life. If you don't, you don't. Okay?
Right.
And it's one of the reasons he gave us objective signs, like the Eucharist, like the confessional, like baptism, so that we can. There's no question of introspection. It's right there in front of me. There he is, right there. All right. Am I in communion with Christ? Well, it's not a vague, wishy-washy feeling. It's eating.
Exactly.
There he is. Okay. Yeah. As long as I'm properly disposed, I have objective evidence that I'm in communion with Christ. But guess what happens? I can walk away from that. I'm now deprived of objective evidence. I come back, I get it back. Jesus said, he who perseveres to the end will be saved. And so, Paul seems to address this. He's not really talking about assurance of salvation. He's now talking about the quality of his apostleship, whether he's a good apostle or not. Okay. But I think the point would still apply, that, look, we have a job to do, orient ourselves toward Christ, follow him, put our eyes on Jesus, leave the judgment of souls up to God.
Exactly. Randy, thank you so much for your email. We do appreciate that. By the way, if you're watching us today on TV, if you would like to send us an email, the address is ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. We'll get to the phones as soon as we come back here from our quick break. 833-288-EWTN is our number, 833-288-3986. It's called to communion here on EWTN.
Sharing the fullness of the Catholic faith. 1-833-288-EWTN. 1-833-288-3986. This is Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders. 1-833-288-EWTN. 1-833-288-3986.
Hey, we're looking forward to taking your call right now. 833-288-EWTN is our number. Here's a text now from Joshua. This just came in. Someone told me that the Baptists can trace their tradition back beyond John the Baptist. Is that true? Thanks, Joshua.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So this is the theory known as Baptist successionism, and it's a modern theory. It's basically a theory concocted by some 19th century Baptist apologists, and there is basically no serious Baptist academic in the world today that holds this theory. So if you went to the main, say, Southern Baptist theological seminaries like Southern Seminary and Louisville, various other denominational seminaries within the Baptist tradition, you would not find this as the dominant theory among Baptist historians. And I actually, when I was in seminary, I had the privilege of studying with a very well-known Baptist historian who, I mean, that was his field, was Baptist history, and he utterly rejected Baptist successionism. Okay, now so it's not widely held, and the reason it's not widely held is because it's untrue. It's untrue. And if you go back and read some of the Baptist pamphlets, try to make the argument, what they do essentially is they cherry pick through history every heretical group that the Catholic Church was opposed to, and they go, yeah, they were Baptists. Yeah, they were Baptists.
Wow.
But, I mean, if you actually go investigate the content of those groups' belief systems, there was nothing Baptist about them, right? The history of the modern Baptist movement comes from the 17th century, 1609, a man named John Smith, who was a Church of England minister and a Puritan separatist who made his way to Holland and encountered the Mennonite movement, which practiced believers or adult baptism, and he adapted Mennonite sacramental theology to some elements of his more traditional Protestantism and concocted what became essentially the theology of the modern Baptist denomination. So it's born out of early 17th century English separatism. It's not something that you can trace in a line of succession, back 2,000 years. And modern Baptist historians recognize this.
Okay, very good. Joshua, thanks so much for your text. We have a line open for you right now, which is 833-288-EWTN, 833-288-3986. Here's an email we received from Betty, who says, "Hey, Dr. Anders, we have a same-sex couple in our family, and they have adopted 3 children who are siblings. We are trying very hard to relate to this couple and their children with love, but in general, this is very difficult for us. I would really appreciate any reference you can give us to help us wade through this challenge in our family. Thanks, Betty."
Okay, thanks. So I have a couple resources for you. Some that you will directly inform your relationship with this group, and some that will more indirectly inform it. There is a sociological study published by Mark Regnerus, who's a sociologist in Texas, called the New Family Structure Study. And then he has, Regnerus has more recently a book published, and I forget the title, but it has to do with sex in America, where it draws on some of the same research. And it's a very good analysis of the effect of family structure on children's outcomes, okay? And the conclusion of the work, and it's heavily documented, is that kids do better when they're raised by their parents. And if they're not raised by their parents, they do better if they're raised by, a mother and a father.
Sure.
And the closer you can get to that biological norm, the better the kid's outcomes. Outliers excluded. Obviously, there are such things as abusive parents and neglectful parents and all that. But, adjusting for, obvious pathologies, kids do better when they're raised by their biological parents. And one of the many problems with, the concept of same-sex relationships setting up shop together in a household that is meant to somehow parody traditional marriage is that it severs the intrinsic connection between a child and his parents, all right? Because by definition, if you have a gay couple, those children are deprived of at least one of their biological parents, right, by definition, okay? So, you might want to take a look at Regnerus's work just to inform your thinking on the matter. Then there is a book that was published by Ignatius Press. Father Paul Chek was a contributor. Is it Speaking the Truth in Love? Is that the title of the book?
I think it is. Father Paul is the head of Courage.
Well, it used to be. It used to be the head of Courage. Right, exactly. And I'll have to look that up in the break to just make sure that I've got the title right. But in any event, it's an Ignatius Press title. And it's a series of essays that are on pastoral approaches to counseling people with same-sex attraction. That may also be of use to you. And then finally, reaching out to the Courage apostolate of the Catholic Church, which Father Paul Chek used to be the head of. And this is the ministry to those that suffer from same-sex attraction and also can be of service to their families as well. And if you haven't ever seen it, check out the film Desire of the Everlasting Hills, which is a Courage production. It includes testimonies from a number of people that suffer this affliction and have found hope and healing in the Catholic Church. Not necessarily complete liberation, right? But coping with an objective state of suffering in their life.
Sure. Start with that. Betty, thank you so much for your email. You may have heard that ding just a moment ago. We just got an email, or a text rather. This is from Rod, watching us today on YouTube. Hey there, Rod. Rod says, if baptism is important, why did Paul say he didn't come to baptize in 1 Corinthians 1:17?
Okay, right. So we know that Paul did baptize because he goes on to say in that same chapter, he enumerates the various people he's baptized. But his particular competence as an apostle was not celebration of the sacrament of baptism. So he was authorized to baptize. He did baptize. But anybody can baptize. Even Tom Price over here could baptize in the case of an emergency, in the bathtub if you had to, and that's allowed. I mean, in cases of emergency, you can't get to a priest or whatever. Your next door neighbor's about to expire, and he says, "I want to die a Christian." Boom, you baptize him in the bathtub, and you're good to go. So anybody can baptize. But the apostles were unique in the church's history. They were the pillars, the foundations on which the church was built. Christ commissioned them directly to preach to the Gentiles the unsearchable riches of Christ and the message that now the whole world, not just the Jews, were to be reconciled to the God of Abraham through the messiahship of Jesus. And they were firsthand witnesses to that, okay? Now, that's, so 5,000 people came into the church at Pentecost or thereabouts and were baptized, okay? Now, I don't know, maybe St. Peter was, lining them up there by the River Jordan and going 1, 2, 3, but he could very easily have delegated that task to any number of associates, all right?
Sure.
And meanwhile, he's going around the business of preaching and exhorting and doing the work of an apostle, which is particularly to bear witness to the resurrection of Jesus and let other people who don't have that particular competence take up the important but not as important job of baptizing.
Very good. Rod, thank you so much for checking us out today on YouTube, and we appreciate your question. This is Call to Communion here on EWTN. If you're ready now, let's go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN. We begin with Evra in Asheville, North Carolina, listening to us on Sirius XM 130. Hey there, what's on your mind today?
Hey, so I was raised Southern Baptist, and I was baptized when I was about 7 years old, and I grew up learning that in order to be baptized, you had to have a public profession of faith, and then you would be baptized afterwards. So I was wondering, why does the Catholic Church baptize infants, and the reasoning and any biblical reasoning behind that? Because that just never made sense to me, because I always assumed you had to profess the faith before you could be baptized.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate the question. Well, Catholics continue to connect baptism with the profession of faith, and when infants are baptized in the church, they do so by making a profession of faith vicariously through their godparents, okay? And so there's a notion there of corporate identity and belonging, all right, that is also foreign to the Baptist tradition. But your intimation, your sense, or your intuition, I should say, that there's an intrinsic connection between faith and baptism is validated by Catholic tradition. We agree. It was Jesus who said, "Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved." Okay? So it connects faith and baptism, and the Catholic Church continues to connect faith and baptism. And adult converts to the Catholic faith who are not capable of, who are capable of making a conscious profession of faith do so prior to receiving the sacrament of baptism.
Right.
So then why should we go through this rigmarole of the vicarious profession on behalf of infants and admit them to the sacrament? Well, first of all, because Scripture exhorts us to do so. In Peter's Pentecost sermon, when he preaches the gospel and the many thousands are convicted and cut to the heart, they say, "What shall we do?" He says, "Repent and be baptized for the remission of your sins." Baptism really does remit sins because Peter said what he meant and meant what he said.
Right.
And the promise is for you and for your children. The promise is for you and for your children. And when we see the unfolding of apostolic history in the book of Acts, that is the pattern. So the convert hears the word of the gospel, believes, and he and his whole household are baptized. Look at Acts chapter 16 with the Philippian jailer, for example. Okay, so the whole household are baptized along with the believing parents. Now, why does that work? Why does that work out? Well, the Old Covenant and the New Covenant are different in some respects, and they're similar in some respects. One of the differences between the Old Covenant, the Mosaic Covenant, or the Abrahamic Covenant, and the New Covenant is that the New Covenant is more extensive in the scope, extent, and efficacy of God's mercy. All right, we get more grace, more people get more grace, and grace does more for us under the new covenant than it did under the old. Now, under the old covenant, God commanded the Israelites to perform the sign of covenant inclusion upon their children, and that, of course, would be circumcision. In Colossians chapter 2, St. Paul analogizes circumcision and baptism, because baptism is the sign of inclusion into the new covenant, which we have in Christ. As many as are baptized have clothed themselves with Christ. That's what St. Paul says in Galatians 3:27. So if God wanted children to participate in the promises of the Abrahamic and the Mosaic covenants, and the intent of the new covenant is to massively expand the scope of God's mercy, and that's clearly what Paul tells us in the book of Ephesians. That's the great mystery that was hidden in Christ, that now Gentiles too have been made partakers of the covenant of promise through baptism in Christ. How much more so is he going to include the children of believers on the new covenant as he included them under the old? Okay,
sure.
And you might say, well, isn't conscious understanding necessary for the faith to be effective in one's personal life? And I would say absolutely not. All right, and I give you all kinds of illustrations where that's not the case. So for instance, imagine someone who understands only very little of the Christian faith. Much of what they grasp only implicitly, just because they adhere to authority. So, take the Baptist, for example. Maybe he's only heard John 3:16. And there's, 65 books, or 99.99% of the Bible he's never read. But he implicitly agrees, whatever is in the Bible, I believe. Hadn't read it yet, but when I get there, I'll believe it. All right? He's got a faith that's almost entirely implicit. All right? Or take someone who has a tremendous intellectual deficit. All right? They're disabled in some way, so that they're not rationally capable of understanding the content of the faith. Do we really want to suggest that a person like that is deprived of the grace of God because of intellectual debility? Not at all. What about you when you're asleep? If you're not consciously thinking or contemplating the grace or extent of God's mercy, are you therefore denied or deprived of it? Okay, not at all. And we know even from what St. Paul teaches about glossolalia, or speaking in tongues, from the book of 1 Corinthians, that it is possible to pray, to genuinely pray. He talks about prayer in the Spirit that is not intelligible and not intellectually fruitful. So he suggests to us in that passage that there is a mode of spiritual engagement with the mysteries of God, animated by Christ's Spirit, that is non-intellectual, all right, and without any understanding at all. So lots of ways in which we can see in sacred Scripture that we can be a participant in the work of redemption, or the work of God's Spirit, without conscious, explicit understanding. All right, and so that's what happens in infants. They have a faith, because faith is a gift, right? It's infused into us. They have a faith, but it's a faith that's wholly implicit. It's entirely implicit. But they have the grace of God, and as they grow in that grace and are nurtured in the faith, that faith becomes more and more explicit over time, and therefore more and more fruitful. Okay? Now, again, why would we do this? Well, the effects of baptism are so great, we don't want to deprive our children of them. Right. Number one, original sin is washed away, and they become participants in the divine nature. 2 Peter 1:4 tells us that. Baptism now saves you. 1 Peter chapter 3 tells us that. Okay, so we don't want to deprive our children of the grace of participation in Christ. They become members of Christ's body, which is the church, and are therefore entitled to all the graces and mercies that are there on offer for the communion of saints. They become priests in the Catholic Church as well, able to offer the sacrifice of their very lives along with that of Jesus.
Evra, thank you so much for your call. Glad you're calling in from Asheville, North Carolina. When we come back in a moment or two, we'll be talking with Adam in Pigeon, Michigan. Got it. Pigeon, Michigan. We also have a line open for you right now, and that's 833-288-EWTN, 833-288-3986.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders. 1-833-288-EWTN. 1-833-288-3986.
By the way, in addition to answering your questions at 833-288-EWTN, we also ask from time to time, what is stopping you from becoming a Catholic yourself? If you're listening or watching today and you're not a Catholic, we'd like to know why you're not a Catholic. You don't have to tell us why you're listening to EWTN or watching EWTN. We know that a lot of non-Catholics do so, but we are curious as to why you have decided not to be a Catholic, or why you're kind of standing there on the 1 yard line. Should I not? What's kind of driving that decision or decision not to? Back to the phones right now, 833-288-EWTN. We continue with Adam in Pigeon, Michigan, listening to us on Ave Maria Radio. Adam, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Dr. Anders. I've been invited to a Mennonite church service, and I don't really know anything about them or much about them, and so I'm curious if you have any information, history differences, that sort of thing, and if you think it's a good idea.
Sure, thanks. I appreciate it. So the Mennonites take their name and their origin from a man by the name of Menno Simons, who was a 16th century. To call him a Protestant doesn't tell you enough. Within 16th century Protestantism, there were the major division were between those leaders that enjoyed the approbation of the civic community, the political leadership. And they're sometimes called the magisterial reformers. And those would be people like Martin Luther, John Calvin, Cranmer, Bullinger, Butzer. They took over with government approval the so-called Reformation of the church in their territories. Okay. Then there was another group that were variously called the Anabaptists, sometimes called the Catabaptists, and also today often referred to under the title of the Radical Reformation, that took a very, very extreme and sectarian line. They rejected the legitimacy of Christians participating in civil government. They rejected the justice of any kind of warfare. They were radical pacifists. They rejected a lot of the theological doctrine of mainline standard Protestantism, particularly things like the doctrine of predestination. And then the most distinctive thing was they practiced the baptism of adults rather than baptism of infants. And so they believed in the idea of a gathered church, right? That the church was not a sort of a civil community defined in part by genealogy or parenthood or family, but it was an entirely voluntary association. And that went to highlight their sense that they were separate from the body politic in a kind of radical way. And sometimes they would take other sorts of radical positions. Not the Mennonites, but others of this group would take deeply apocalyptic view towards current events and imagine the end of the world was upon them, and they would have sort of charismatic phenomena and pretend to prophecies and things like that. And sometimes they got into some wacky sexual practices as well, but not the Mennonites. The Mennonites were more staid and sober kind of brand of Anabaptists. So that's their historical origin. Now, the Mennonites today are a pretty well-established denomination, and some of the sort of wild excesses of 16th century Anabaptism didn't apply to the Mennonites. And if you go to one of their worship services, it might seem indistinguishable to you from a lot of other Protestant worship services. You're going to recognize, scripture reading and preaching and prayer and so forth. And the things that would mostly distinguish Mennonites today would be their pacifism. All right, they don't believe in the doctrine of just war. Varying degrees of adherence of participation in civil society. So some of them might refrain from voting, for instance. And there are kind of shades of conservatism versus liberalism within the tradition. On the further to the right you go within the Mennonite movement, the more and more they begin to look like something like the Amish.
Really?
And the Amish are actually an outgrowth of the Mennonite movement. So when I used to live in Iowa, there were Mennonite communities in Iowa that were on the more conservative side, and they were easy to spot because they unlike the Amish, they would still drive cars and use electricity, stuff like that. But they would show up at the local Walmart, and you're like, here comes Laurie Ingalls Wilder, to the local, the women would be dressed in a kind of sort of 19th century prairie type of garb, and it was you talk about not looking like you belong to the civil society. They definitely stood out as maintaining their own lifestyle.
Sure.
That's not the mainstream of the Mennonite movement. I mean, your average Mennonite on the street, so to speak, is going to look, talk, smell, act, eat like you or me, and mainly distinguished, I think, by their commitment to pacifism. So they're nice people. We love Mennonites. Hope they love us back. And I think it's fine for you to go. If your Mennonite friend wants you to come worship with him, you might see if he'll return the favor and come worship with you, and invite him to the Catholic Mass or to some catechetical event or a lecture or something in the Catholic Church. Historically, Mennonites took a pretty dim view of the Catholic Church. Historically, the Catholic Church took a dim view of the Mennonites. But we're getting along better these days, so maybe he'll come.
Hopefully so. Adam, is that helpful for you?
Yeah, very much. Thank you so much.
Very good.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. That opens up a line for you now, 833-288-EWTN. Let's go now to Michelle in Augusta, Georgia, listening to us on St. Paul Radio. Hey, Michelle, what's on your mind today?
Hi, yeah. I just had a basic 101 question. What is if you can explain the difference between what the Protestants believe is the rapture and what the Catholic Church teaches as far as the end time?
Yeah, sure. Appreciate it. So first of all, not all Protestants believe in the doctrine of the rapture. In fact, it's only a minority of Protestants that believe in the doctrine of the rapture. But I see from the call screener that you live in Augusta, Georgia, a disproportionately large number of Protestants in Augusta, Georgia are going to hold to that doctrine in compared to the wider Protestant world. So it tends to be associated with Protestant fundamentalism particularly.
Okay.
But mainstream Protestant doctrine for 500 years knows nothing of this rapture doctrine and rejects it. So it's a small minority view within the wider world of Protestantism. There's nothing like it in the Catholic tradition. Catholic Church utterly rejects this idea. So let me explain what the rapture is in the mind of its adherents and how that differs from the Catholic position. So it was invented, the doctrine of the rapture was invented by a man named John Nelson, Darby. Darby, in the 19th century. He was a Plymouth Brethren thinker. And he was a literalist. He was a biblical literalist, a fundamentalist, and he noticed that there were a lot of prophecies in the Old Testament that made claims about Israel. Israel's going to do this, and Israel's going to do that, and of course, prior to 1948, there was no political state called Israel. There was no political state for Jewish people or people of Hebrew or Jewish descent. And the traditional understanding of the church is that the church inherits, to a certain extent, the promises applied to the new covenant. I mean, St. Paul tells us that the great glory of the gospel is that Gentiles are now gathered together with Jews as heirs to the covenant promises. I mean, this is a New Testament doctrine. And so prophecies about specifically aimed at Israel or Judah in the Old Testament are understood in a spiritual sense as applying to the fullness that is within the church. But Darby, being a strict literalist, and for other reasons as well, said, well, if the sacred text says Israel, it must mean Israel. So there must be some future in which there is a geopolitical state called Israel that can be the inheritor of these specific promises. But he recognized that the existence of the Christian church was kind of an inconvenient parenthesis in God's plan. All right, and there are actually dispensationalists that will speak of the church as a parenthesis in God's plan. That language has been used.
Wow.
And so he says, well, how do I fit the New Testament together with what I see in the Old Testament? And he rejected the typological or allegorical interpretation that's the standard Christian way of dealing with the sacred text, and instead he invented this idea of distinct dispensations in God's plan, that God acts one way in one era and another way in another era, okay? And then he imagines that at the end of time, God's going to recreate the political state of Israel to be to enjoy the fulfillment of all these literal Old Testament prophecies. But then he's got the problem of Christianity in the meanwhile. So what he does is he says, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll get him out of the picture. So here's where the idea of the rapture comes in. The idea is that God zaps the Christian church out of the time stream, like gets him out in outer space, So you get rid of the parenthesis. Then God fulfills his promises to Israel, and then he reinserts the Christian church back at the end of time, and we all come back and we dance around in Jerusalem and sing Hebrew songs while Jewish priests are slaughtering bulls on an altar.
Wow.
Okay, that's the picture. That's the picture. All right. Needless to say, so he invents this in the 19th century, and it takes off wildly among early 20th century fundamentalists because of their, well, for one reason, because of their peculiar view of biblical interpretation, namely they're fundamentalists and they're literalists. Also because they had an apocalyptic view of history. Apocalyptic means, I think the end of the world is upon me. And it was easy for fundamentalists to view the world that way because it seemed like, the rise of communism or secularism or Darwinian evolution, there are all these forces that seem to be railed against fundamentalist Christianity. They were getting kicked out of their own denominations in the fundamentalist modernist controversy of the 1930s. And so it fit with their view of history. The things were going to get worse and worse and worse until they got zapped out of there. And of course, they just went absolutely gaga in 1948. When we get the modern, political state of Israel as a result of Zionism, they were just all over that, which is why you find in segments of fundamentalism today a kind of just uncritical dogmatism about anything that happens politically in Israel. They identify almost directly with the will of God in a sort of very uncritical and naive way. Now, I'm not taking a position personally on this show on U.S. or international policy towards Israel. That's not the point of this. I'm just explaining one of the reasons why fundamentalists take such a strong view politically on Israel.
Okay.
Whether they should or shouldn't for other reasons is beyond the scope of this question. So that's the fundamentalist view. That's the rapture view that's not widely held outside of fundamentalism. What's the Catholic understanding? Well, I already began to explain how we understand the relationship of the two testaments. All right. That the whole of the Old Testament is oriented towards the coming of Christ, the Messiah, and the new covenant which we have in Jesus, the outpouring of God's love in our hearts, His Spirit shed abroad in our hearts and in our minds, the kingdom of God now present among us, like a mustard seed, the smallest of all the seeds that grows until it becomes the largest tree. Jesus says, and all the birds of the air come and nest in its branches. And the church is that kingdom of God now present in mystery, growing like leaven throughout the dough, like the mustard seed that starts small and grows big and has an increasingly important presence and role in civil society. So it's the opposite of apocalypticism, right? And yet never comes to complete perfection this side of eternity. And does suffer ups and downs and periods of persecution and periods of flourishing, and it will be like that till the end of time. All right, we're not futurists, we're not antiquarians, we're not utopianists. We think that Christians are supposed to be salt and light in society. They're there to witness to the truth of the gospel and to work for justice and peace in real time. But we're citizens of another world. Our citizenship is in heaven, and it's to Christ coming back at the end of time that we look for the final fulfillment of these prophecies, when the dead will be raised, the souls will be judged, the righteous will go to heaven, the unrighteous will go to hell, and hopefully, if Christ judges us worthy, we'll enter into the kingdom with him forever. So there's no rapture, there's no, parenthesis, there's no zapping the church out and bringing them back. All that's unbiblical and unnecessary and quite frankly, kind of horrific.
Yeah.
And instead, we have the presence of Christ sacramentally with us today.
Absolutely. Michelle, thank you so much for checking in with us in Augusta, Georgia. We're delighted for your call. This is Call to Communion here on EWTN. I want to take a moment to just talk about podcasting. Now, what on earth is podcasting? You may have heard this term and you're thinking, now, what is that? Well, don't worry about it. It's very simply audio on demand. You can subscribe to a podcast or a recording, if you will, of this show or a number of other shows here on EWTN, just like you would subscribe to a magazine. And when you turn on your computer, there it will be waiting for you. So do check it out. Visit EWTN.com/podcast to check out all of our podcasts today. EWTN.com/podcast. We're going to go in just a moment here to Mike in Frisco, Texas. First, I want to get to this text from Nellie, who says, when did the term Pope come to be used? Do we know, Dan?
Yeah, we do. So the word pope in the 2nd century, or papa, or, it's a term of endearment like daddy, was widely used for bishops, not just for the Bishop of Rome. And we have testament of this in the 2nd century. And to this day, actually, the Coptic Church refers to their patriarch, the Bishop of Alexandria. They refer to him as the Pope. All right, and so that's this widespread usage throughout church history. And I think in the East it's even applied sometimes to individual priests. Okay,
really.
And it was in the 4th century that the title began to be restricted or used in a way that would particularly identify the Bishop of Rome. And I believe it was Pope Gregory VII, who was an 11th century pope, that prescribed the term to be used only for the Bishop of Rome.
Okay.
So there you go. There's the history.
Sounds good. There you go, Nellie. Thank you so much for your text. As promised, let's go to Mike in Frisco, Texas, just outside of Dallas, listening to us on Sirius XM 130. Hello, Mike. What's on your mind today?
Good afternoon. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Dr. Anders, I've become a pretty good fan of Anglican theologian N.T. Wright. Who,
oh, yeah. Like him.
As you know, is published quite a bit. And I'm listening to his latest book on Paul, a biography. And I haven't read all of his work, so I can't say that this is an exhaustive statement. But he seems to, at least in this book, take for granted James, the brother of Jesus, was exactly and literally the brother of Jesus and probably the son of Mary. And it just takes me back, but it strikes me as odd for him to say that. He may, I don't know if he's being cynical or not, but he certainly has to know that what the Catholic understanding of James, the brother of Jesus, in the New Testament is, and it just seems like he's taking it for granted that Jesus had, a brother of shared DNA. And I'm just wondering, I don't want to believe he's cynical, but what could possibly be someone as erudite as N.T. Wright and someone that
Sure.
you think, and I agree, is what could possibly be an argument from his perspective?
Well, first of all, in Matthew chapter 13, we read in verse 55, the crowd, speaking of Jesus, says, "Is this not the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary? Are not his brethren James and Joseph, Simon and Judas? Are not all his sisters here with us? Where did this man get all these things?" Now, so there we actually identify James as the brother in the mind of the crowd, identified as the brother of Jesus. A couple things to note about that passage. One of them is they identify him as Joseph's son. All right, which of course he wasn't, and Matthew himself says that he wasn't. All right, but now flip over to Matthew 27, and we read at the foot of the cross. All right, ministering to him were Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. So now we have the James and Joseph, who were previously identified as the brothers of Jesus, are now identified as the children of this woman named Mary. And we got you can just poke a stick at the New Testament, you hit somebody named Mary. I mean, Marys are just falling off the cart in the first century. All right. And then you go over to John chapter 19, and that very same Mary is identified as the wife of Clopas. All right. So not and a relative of the Blessed Virgin. So not the Blessed Virgin Mary. So there's evidence internal to the text that these characters were cousins of Jesus, not biological siblings. And you don't have to go outside the text for evidence of that. All right. Now, as to what would motivate N.T. Wright, well, I'm a big fan of N.T. Wright, and N.T. Wright's one of the reasons that I became a Catholic. And that's pertinent to your question, because N.T. Wright has led a lot of people into the Catholic Church. And from what I understand, having read him, that just bugs the stew out of him. All right, it really bothers him. It really does. I mean, he's not a Catholic. He's intentionally not Catholic. He's very impatient with a lot of Catholic claims, and he's perfectly well aware that people read his books, and from those books they derive a Catholic vision of the Church and a Catholic vision of salvation, and then make the logical jump and become Catholic, and that really gets under his skin. All right, and he said so. He said so. Okay, so now I'm speculating. But there are places, not just the obvious Protestant Catholic differences. There are places where Wright takes a position that he knows flies in the face of tradition, and Wright, although so many things he says are amenable to a Catholic interpretation, he really does believe at some level, although I think differently than most Protestants, at some level in the idea of sola scriptura, all right? That the data set, if you will, for deriving the content of Christian faith are the canonical texts. And in fact, even within his own tradition, within Anglicanism or within Protestantism, there are those that take him on that really don't appreciate N.T. Wright because he takes positions that they recognize as being contrary to their own Protestant tradition. And he always comes back and sort of, pounds his fist and says, look, are you guys sola scriptura Protestants or not? I'm not going to be held captive to any dogmatic formula that's the fruit of tradition, whether that's Calvinist tradition, Lutheran tradition, or even Chalcedonian tradition. A Chalcedonian would be the doctrine of Christ that came from the Council of Chalcedon, which most Anglicans adhere to. All right, and that's of course Catholic doctrine as well. And I think the scariest part of Wright's theology for me personally is that he seems to me to be Nestorian in his view of Jesus. Now, Nestorius was a 5th century heretic who denied that denied that Mary was the mother of God, and set up a kind of division in the person of Christ between the human Christ and then the divine Logos united to the person. All right, and Wright seems to talk this way because there are times when Wright will say things like, Christ, suggesting that Christ did not know he was divine, or that Christ kind of grew in his understanding of his own divinity or his own messianic state or something like that, that suggests a kind of division in the personality of Jesus. And he must know I know he knows because he's brilliant, that's a Nestorian position. All right. Now, why would he do that? Well, I think that while he's really, really interesting in what he does with sacred scripture, I think sometimes Wright is keen to show how he can sort of exegete his own understanding of Christianity directly from the text of Scripture, and is not afraid to thumb his nose at any traditional formulation, no matter who he offends, because he really pounds the table and says he's a sola scriptura Protestant. And again, I know that it bugs him that people read his stuff and become Catholic. So maybe, I don't know the man, but maybe he's not shy about finding places to poke the Catholic Church in the eye. But he does it in a very urbane, sophisticated British way.
Okay, very good. Mike, thank you so much for your call. Here's a quick email here from Tom who says, my question is about the Shriners. It is my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that the Shriners are affiliated with the Masons. Now, I donate to the Shriners Hospital here locally. I'm wondering if this is okay in light of the fact, that Catholics are not allowed to support Masons. Thanks, Tom.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. So Shriners are Masons. I mean, I'm neither a Shriner nor a Mason nor the son of one, but my understanding is to become a Shriner, you first have to be a Mason. Right, it's like a club within a club.
Okay.
And so that's off limits for Catholics. In terms of whether or not you can donate to a Shriners Hospital, personally, I wouldn't. Because if I'm going to give money to support the local hospital, I'm going to give to the Catholic hospital, all right, or to some Catholic apostolate that ministers to the poor or something. I mean, there's a finite number of dollars in my bank account. There are only so many charities that I can support.
Sure.
I'm going to support Christ Church. That's where my money is going to go, okay? Is it intrinsically immoral to give to a Shriners Hospital? Well, I would want to know, first of all, if that hospital is in turn supporting other Shriner activities that are not immediately related to medical care, and the extent to which they may, advance the mission of the Shriners as an outgrowth of Masonry. And I'd say your cooperation, I mean, the Shriners and the Masons oppose the Catholic Church. It's in their sort of bedrock governing understanding, right? But I would say that, by supporting a medical outfit that's affiliated with the Shriners, your degree of cooperation is pretty darn remote. You're not in there personally advancing. You're certainly not formally cooperating with the intent of the Shriners opposing Catholicism.
Right.
So you're probably safe from a moral theology point of view. From a policy, just kind of prudential point of view, well, why not support the Catholic hospital?
Good point.
I mean, this is the internet age. I mean, if you don't have one next door, you can pick one the town over. I mean, there's going to be one on every other block, just about. We got more hospitals than anybody. More Catholic schools. Hey, give to Catholic schools.
Absolutely.
Right.
Or EWTN.
Or EWTN. There you go. Can't leave that one off.
Dr. David Anders, thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Tom.
Remember that we do the show here on EWTN Radio Monday through Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern, with an encore that same evening at 11 p.m. Eastern. For Michael Birchfield, Matt Kubinski, and Jeff Burson, I'm Tom Price. See you next time right here on EWTN's Call to Communion.